Inside of Modo 501, we have a lot of tools and options that will help us generate a number of UV islands. To get us started, I've made a very simple scene that has a sphere, a cylinder, and then a very just simple 2D plane. Let's jump over into our UV tab up here at the top and start analyzing how we can leverage the very powerful UV toolset in Modo to generate UV islands for each one of these shapes. First off, let's start with the sphere. Now, one of the things that I really like to do whenever I'm generating UV islands inside of Modo is I like to isolate the object that I'm trying to generate UV islands for from the rest of the scene. Meaning, I'm going to select what I want to UV and hide everything else. So I've selected my sphere. Hitting Shift H on my keyboard will hide the unselected polygons, which in my case, which is everything else. So all that I'm left right now is the sphere. Now we have a lot of different tools over here in our toolbar that will help us generate UV islands for this sphere, but today we're going to look at one called the UV projection tool. Now the UV projection tool, when activated, is going to give us a number of options down below. Let's check out some of these options. Now the most important one, let me just resize my interface here. There we go. The most important one is this projection type. As you can see, it has a pretty big drop-down list of a lot of different options, but we're going to look at each one of these individually and analyze what each one of their function does inside the 3D universe. So what we want to do when choosing which projection type is try to closely match our 3D geometry, our actually sphere over here, to one of these options. So we need to try to match the shape to one of these guys over here. So I'm working with a sphere, so it makes sense to use a spherical projection type. Now, when I click on this button, nothing's really going to change until I click inside of my UV grid. So check it out. Watch what happens when I click. Blink. All right, there it is. But it looks kind of funny. This, yeah, we have UV islands, but it looks nothing like a sphere. We're getting these really weird pinches at the polar coordinates for our sphere. We don't want those. That doesn't as closely represent the polygonal flow and layout of our mesh that we have over here. And that's what we're going for. We want to try to have this shape over here resemble our UV islands, and right now it really doesn't match. So when working with the projection type, one of the options that we need to analyze and that we need to adjust is the axis of projection. Now, right now, we're projecting this UV map from the z-axis. And if you look very closely down here at my compass, you can just barely see it. The z-axis is basically coming this way and hitting our sphere from the front on. So when we're doing that, it's getting this edge, this center point right here is what is being struck first, and it's interpreting the tops and the bottom of my sphere. It's just a little bit kind of funky. What would be probably more accurate representation of the shape is if we were to project our UV islands from the top. Let's change it to Y. Aha! Now this more closely resembles what I have in my 3D universe. If you look very closely, let me just zoom in here real fast. If you look very closely, I'm going to drop the tool so I can highlight. All of these polygons at the top and at the bottom of my UV map represent the top and the bottom polygons on my sphere itself. If you look very closely, these are all triangles up here at the top, and then they terminate right there at the center vertice, okay? Also, this is probably the best option that we have for this sphere, because if you look closely, all of these polygonal, these loops flow from the top to the bottom very nice and evenly, and we're getting that nice even flow on our UV map as well. So we want to try to leverage the power of that projection axis to get a more accurate representation of our two-dimensional polygons of our three-dimensional shape. So that's a really important one. Okay, so we have our sphere ready to go. Let me just zoom out and hit the U key to unhide the rest of our scene. And I'm going to do something kind of strange here. I'm actually going to delete my UV islands just so I don't have a lot to have more space to work with. And I want to grab my little cylinder here, Shift H to hide all of the unselected polygons. Oop, there we go. And we're going to go back. Select it. We're going to go back to this UV projection tool and look at some of the other options. Now, one of the other options in the UV projection tool is this cylindrical. Now, on the surface, this seems like it's going to make perfect sense. So let's give it a try because we're working with a cylinder. So the cylindrical projection type seems to be the correct choice. Clicking in the UV grid will apply this tool to our 3D mesh and generate all of our UV islands. Now, huzzah, look at that, we got it. We have a number of UV islands that correctly matches our cylinder. If you look at all of these things in here, the loops are flowing in the right direction. The proportion of our polygons over here, it's a little bit off, but we're close. We can adjust that later. But what we don't have here are the tops and the bottoms. And really what we want to see are shapes, are UV islands that they kind of match and more generally get us to this shape in a 2D form over here. Now, I've selected both of them, and check out what happens. It actually generated the UV islands over here in the workspace, but look, they're just a single edge. I'm going to collapse this just real fast. Look, you can just barely see it. That little orange line up there at the top represents that top polygon here on my cylinder. So this is definitely not the accurate shape that we're looking for. Same with the bottom. We want to have that polygon we want to try to have this shape in our three-dimensional object be the exact same shape over here. We're just getting a line, just getting an edge, so that's a no-go. So we need to kind of expand our tool set a little bit more to generate the correct UV shape for both the top and the bottom polygons on our cylinder. So what I'm going to do, I selected both the top and the bottom in my cylinder, and I'm going to delete those elements from our UV map. Now, this is one of the more challenging things, believe it or not, inside of Modo, but because I don't want to delete it. And let me show you one of the ways that we can delete UV islands from our maps. So I got them selected, and if you go right down over here to Edit UVs, check it out. We have a number of options, one of which is Delete UVs. Ta-da! And now they're gone. Let me show you an additional way of doing the exact same thing. We can go all the way to the top of the screen where it says Texture, and then UV Operators, and then the first one on that list, of course, is Delete, and it's going to accomplish the exact same things. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to adjust my UV map here a little bit. I'm going to move this guy out of the way just using the Move tool, and I'm going to select both the top and the bottom polygons on our cylinder. Now this brings us to our next UV projection type. So again, we're going to go back to the UV projection tool, but this time we're not going to use cylindrical because cylindrical got us basically all the polygons that wrap around the cylinder. We're going to use planar to generate the UV islands for the top and the bottom. Now check this out. Our projection axis is set to Y, and we'll click on the viewport, and that's what we get, which is a step in the right direction. This is exactly what we want. If we were to, let's just explore the different axes. I always like to do this. Z, yeah, that's kind of what we had earlier, just kind of straight lines. X is probably going to, yep, the exact same thing. So Y is definitely the projection axis that we want to use in this particular situation. I want to hit the space bar and drop the tool, and let's analyze what we have going on right now. Now, this looks a little bit different. We have a gigantic red UV island in the center of our UV workspace. Whenever we see a red fill color inside of our UV island, this means that we have two polygons that are sharing the exact same UV space. Check it out. I'm going to select my UV island over here, and check it out. Both of those polygons are selected inside of our 3D space. Now, this doesn't mean that they're joined. It doesn't mean that they're combined in any way. This means that they're literally sitting right on top of each other. Now, an easy way that we can divide all this out is to select one of those polygons over in our 3D workspace. And I'm going to go over here to the right and grab the Move tool. Click inside of our UV workspace. And now I just dragged it to the right. We have both of our UV islands. So pretty cool. So now this is probably more accurately what we want to use for all of our UV islands for this particular model. Notice that each one of these matches both the scale and the correct proportion and shape of their 3D counterparts. We want 2D UV islands to match their 3D shape and size. So this is looking good. Okay. Now we're going to do one more. So let me delete all these. Just going to right click, grab out a marquee selection, texture, UV operators, delete. There we go. And let's unhide the rest of our scene, and let's just focus in on our little plane. Now this is a really cool little simple shape to UV, and as you probably can imagine, what we're looking for inside of our UV island is just a basic shape that matches what we have going on over here. Now we talked about this before in the planar, but we also have, let's just do it real fast using the planar. There it is. Now, whenever we're using planar, and this is the important thing, we have to match the axes to that shape. So Z is definitely wrong. Y is, I probably wouldn't use Y, but X is definitely where I'm going. Now, one of the things that you have to do, and this is kind of the point of this, is that whenever you're making a UV island, you really need to look at which direction it's pointed in, okay? Now, we were able to successfully generate a UV island using the Y projection axis, but is this shape pointing towards the Y axis? No, it's not. Here's a great way to check it out. Inside of my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit the O key, O for October, on my keyboard, and then go over to my Visibilities tab, and what we're going to check out is Show Selection Normals, okay? Now, what this is going to allow me to do, so once I select that polygon, this little line generating from the center of the face, or the center of the polygon, is the normal, otherwise known as the surface direction for this particular polygon. Now, one of the things that we need to do when we're analyzing the direction of this is to ensure that we're getting a UV island that matches the same direction as the surface normal. Now, I use my compass an awful lot down here at the bottom, and if you analyze the direction of the x-axis, it's pointed in the exact same direction or orientation of the surface normal coming off our polygon. So this projection tool, in combination with the projection axis, is a really powerful tool, but it does require some initial analysis on the user side to get to recreate the proper orientation for this shape. Now, ultimately, what we're looking for here is that I want this top edge. Yeah, there it is. Check it out. So I selected that top edge, and that one over there selected. If I select this left one, looks like we're kind of close, but yeah, and then the bottom. Now, this left one doesn't necessarily mean that it's flipped upside down. I would kind of start with the top and the bottom and work my way up from there. This might be flipped, but so we'll talk about that in a later video. But we're close. We're in the ballpark. So the UV projection tool is a very, very powerful tool that will help us generate UV islands that match the correct proportion and scale of our shapes quickly inside of Modo. It's not the only tool that will enable this to do it, but it's a good first step. As I mentioned in the last video about UV mapping, this is an art form. There's not a silver bullet solution that enables us to generate UV islands quickly. So we have to leverage a lot of these tools over here on the left-hand side of the screen to help us get us to that end result. So this is just a way. I use it all the time. It's the UV projection tool, and you can find this in almost any version of Modo. I believe starting in version 201 is when they unleashed the UV islands in the texture mapping system inside of Modo. So this is an old school system that's been around forever. So if you have an older version of Modo, this is definitely something that you'll be able to find in those copies as well. UV projection tool in Modo 501.